If you've ever tried striking a match with numb fingers in freezing wind, you already understand the problem Cold War soldiers faced in the Arctic. Paper matches shattered, chemical heads crumbled, lighters froze solid. In places like northern Alaska, Greenland and the Soviet far north, fire wasn't a convenience. It was the difference between life and death. And military planners knew that traditional fire-starting methods failed exactly when they were needed most. During the early Cold War, both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces quietly adopted a method that could start fires in temperatures far below zero, in gale-force winds, and even after being submerged in snow and ice. What they relied on wasn't luck, friction, or fragile chemicals. It was metallurgy, chemistry, and brutal practicality. The Cold War Arctic problem forced militaries to rethink fire from first principles. Cold War doctrine assumed that pilots would eject over frozen tundra, special forces would operate behind enemy lines in polar regions, and long-range patrols would survive weeks without resupply. Fire meant warmth, signalling, food preparation, and morale. Matches failed because the phosphorus heads absorbed moisture and cracked flint lighters, failed because fuel thickened and sparks weakened. Even early butane lighters were useless below freezing. Militaries needed something that ignored temperature entirely. The answer came from an unexpected place, the same materials used in aircraft, flares, and weapon systems. Magnesium-based ignition became the fire method that Arctic winds couldn't defeat. Magnesium burns at over 3,000 degrees Celsius. It doesn't care about wind chill, snow, or oxygen-poor environments. Once ignited, it produces intense heat and bright light, enough to ignite damp wood, frozen moss, or fuel-soaked fabric. Cold War survival kits began including magnesium alloy blocks paired with hardened steel strikers, not because they were elegant, but because they were nearly impossible to disable. To use it, soldiers were trained to shave thin curls from the magnesium block, pile them tightly, and strike the steel to produce a shower of sparks hot enough to ignite the metal itself. Once burning, the magnesium created a self-sustaining ignition source capable of starting larger fires even in Arctic blasts. Modern survivalists can apply this exact method today. A magnesium fire starter works in rain, snow, and subzero temperatures. The key is preparation. Shavings must be fine and compact, and the ignition must be shielded just long enough to take. This is not a fast method, but it is a reliable one when everything else fails. Chemical ignition gave Cold War operatives fire without sparks or flame. Some Cold War survival kits went a step further, using chemical reactions instead of sparks. The most infamous was potassium permanganate, paired with a fuel source like glycol, or antifreeze. When combined, these chemicals react exothermically, producing heat and flame without friction. This method worked even when gloves were frozen solid and visibility was zero. While modern civilians should approach chemical fire starting with caution and respect, the principle remains important. Fire doesn't require flame to begin. It requires heat and reaction. Cold War training emphasized understanding chemistry over memorizing tools, allowing soldiers to improvise using materials already present in vehicles, aircraft, or medical kits. So, today, this knowledge, well, it actually applies to emergency preparedness and, historical understanding. Knowing why certain reactions produce heat helps explain why some survival tools have worked across centuries, while others, well, they just disappear. Arctic fires, you see, succeeded because Cold War doctrine always prioritized redundancy over convenience. Now, one of the most important lessons from Cold War Arctic survival manuals is that, honestly, no single fire-starting method was ever trusted alone. Soldiers always carried at least 3 methods: mechanical, chemical, and incendiary. Magnesium was backed up by stormproof matches, all sealed up in wax. Chemical igniters were paired with flares. Nothing, and I mean nothing, relied on fine motor skills or dry conditions. This mindset is still relevant today. A modern survival kit should never rely on a single ignition source. Cold weather exposes weaknesses brutally and quickly, and redundancy is not paranoia. It's experience written into doctrine. The reason this method still matters, really, is because physics hasn't changed. Technology evolves, but combustion physics does not. Magnesium still burns, chemical reactions still release heat, and wind still robs warmth faster than humans can produce it. Cold War planners didn't invent new fire. They stripped fire down to what could not fail. That's why, this method still outperforms many modern gadgets. Batteries die, electronics crack, pressurized fuel freezes, but a block of magnesium and a steel striker, well, they remain inert until needed. Then they're violent and effective. For today's survivalist, historian, or outdoor enthusiast, honestly, the value lies not just in copying the tool, but in understanding the thinking behind it. Fire must be reliable when hands shake, visibility drops, and, well, time is running out. Cold War Arctic fire doctrine reminds us that survival knowledge, well, it ages a lot better than any equipment ever could. Many Cold War survival techniques were never meant for civilians, yet they remain, honestly, some of the most robust systems ever devised. Fire starting in Arctic blasts wasn't about comfort or convenience. It was about certainty. When soldiers were dropped into frozen nothingness, their fire-starting method simply could not be allowed to fail. That's the real lesson worth preserving, isn't it? Choose tools that ignore conditions. Learn methods that work when you are tired, cold, and under pressure. History, in the end, rewards practicality, not novelty. If this kind of forgotten survival knowledge matters to you, if you value real history over myth and proven techniques over trends, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Share this video with fellow history buffs and survival enthusiasts who appreciate the hard-earned lessons of the past. Because, honestly, the best survival knowledge is the kind that already worked when failure wasn't an option.